And away we go. It's the DFS Early Bird presented by Awesemo.com. Dan Strafford and Adam Scher along with you on this Wednesday morning. Dave Lochran still off. He'll be back later on this week after his nuptials to Justine. Congratulations again to them. Adam, how the hell are you doing?
Doing well. Enjoying
You're not
staying
getting married anytime soon, right?
No, not getting married anytime soon.
All right.
Enjoying staying busy with Lofty, doing whatever he's doing now.
Right. Well, fair. We'll leave that for a different podcast for a different time. But question I have for you, and I think it's something baseball at this time of year can get somewhat monotonous, somewhat repetitious, where you're sort of pulling up the same stats day over day, and you're trying to find the edge, and you're trying to find the different pieces. You do a lot of projections. You're MMEing. You're focusing on the projection base and what your spreadsheets are telling you, along with maybe adjusting here and there on pitchers or what you see from your eye in baseball. Are you considering last 6 weeks? Are you considering July 1st through today stats that may influence the way your projections come out? Or are you really honed in on the way your projection model is put together and what it's putting out into your lineups?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, especially this time of the year, I'm going to just trust what I'm getting, because it's one thing early in the year, pitchers make, especially with pitchers make adjustments in the off season and spring training, and you're getting a kind of a different pitcher at the beginning of the year than maybe you're projecting. But normally by this time of the year, most pitchers aren't making, wholesale changes. An exception to that is I did kind of manually manipulate my Clayton Kershaw projection last night, because it's just something I had noticed that his strikeouts have been up, and I found an actual reason for it. And so I was like, okay, well, maybe I need to actually be projecting him higher than I have been. But most cases, it's just kind of, at this point in the year, I think the numbers are the numbers.
Right. And so we've talked a bit about the Mariners against lefties. From a team offense perspective, do you think there is some wiggle room there when it comes to maybe single entry or the way you're considering one pitcher versus one team on a single night?
How do you mean?
So the Mariners, to start the year, if you're looking at season-long numbers against lefties, have struggled. They've been one of the worst teams, but over the last 6 weeks or 5 weeks, they've been a team that's been middling, if not better than middling. We saw them against McKay last night, and I don't want to be results-oriented, so that's why I'm posing the question. Do you start to consider a 6-week sample as large enough for an offense to consider going against in a stack against a lefty when they've been season-long wise so terrible against them?
Well, I think the big thing is just paying attention to who's in the lineup. Like if you go on FanGraphs, even with the Mariners, they have a high strikeout percentage, but if you go on FanGraphs and click the active roster button, they still have like a 108 WRC plus against left-handed pitching. So their active roster has guys that are productive. If you go individually and kind of go through the lineup, they have guys that are productive hitters. It's just that there's a lot of strikeouts there. But yeah, I think it's really important to pay attention to who's actually in lineups, and also pay attention to who's on the roster. Like the Padres were an example too. Obviously, it didn't matter. Sonny Gray struck out a ton of guys, but the Padres lineup right now is different than if you look at their season-long numbers. It's not as good because you don't have Tatis or Reyes, but it also doesn't have two guys in there striking out 30% of the time. So it's just, you should be projecting it differently.
Right, and I think that's where the conclusion I was hoping we would get to is that you are maybe feeling the monotony of day-over-day baseball, but each day presents a different challenge, and looking at the stats and looking into why they are the way they are is really important at this point. Projections are great, and projections have a whole lot of data in them to begin with, especially for you all who subscribe to Awesemo, or if you're subscribed somewhere else. A lot of this data is built in already. It's baked into that projection and baked into this process. But if you are someone who's hand building or trying to figure some things out, consider why things are happening. Consider why your projections look the way they do. Consider why Fantasy Cruncher or Lineup Builder is doing what it does. And then maybe make some manual adjustments where you feel confident in that change as you build those lineups. August baseball, September baseball can be a fickle beast. So we are going to do our best to break down this 11-game Wednesday night slate, which is a little bit of an oddity. Typically we have a shorter early and then a shorter late slate on Wednesdays, but here we have a main slate that is 11 games. We will talk about that exclusively. If you want to play the 3-game, by all means, hop into Slack chat, use the projections over at Awesemo.com. If you want to be a member, use the promo code EARLYBIRD for 50% off your first month. So, Adam, we dive in, and we've talked all season long that DraftKings pricing is high, right? We know that pitching is at a higher price point. We know that that is going to be an extreme. But on this slate and against this opponent in Detroit, You have Houston with a starter named Justin Verlander at 12K. That doesn't feel that high. That doesn't feel as high as he could be. Am I wrong in that estimation, or does this feel like a really okay spot for Verlander to be 12K?
No, I think that if he were like, he's going to be really popular at 12K, and he should be.
Right.
If he were less than 12K, it would just be, like the easiest. It would be like Chris Sale, like when, Sale comes in at $10,000 or whatever.
I feel like this is the sort of situation where I question DK's pricing, because I feel like there is a method to their madness, if you will. But then you see something like this, and I feel like Verlander should be 12.7, right? Like, I feel like they're just short of where he should be effectively priced. So it feels like something's slightly off with this pricing for Verlander.
Yeah, I'm kind of torn on that, because on one hand, I agree that you could price Verlander higher and he would still be a good play. But on the other hand, once you get a guy to 12K, it kind of serves its purpose. Like, unless he throws a complete game shutout with like 15 strikeouts, sure, he's not breaking the slate at that price point. He'll, if he goes for 35 points, he's giving you a good start, and 35 points are really valuable, obviously. But it starts to become like impossible for him to be a top point per dollar play. And it just, becomes about the raw points. So I think 12K serves its purpose. I think that, there's, he could still be a good play if he were more expensive, though.
It's a great point, though, and not one I intended to ask you about, but you make the point about what the roster construction beyond this one starting pitcher is that he's not going to break the slate on his own at this price point simply because of what you can do around him. So if we walk through Verlander against Detroit, Buehler against Toronto, two good matchups off the top for two of our top price starting pitchers. You get Corbin against Pittsburgh, so not a high strikeout total there. Same for Mike Minor. Not a great spot for him. Lefty against this Angels lineup that doesn't strike out a ton, has a ton of power ready bats, a ton of power against lefties. And then Darvish gets the San Francisco Giants. He's been an enigmatic pitcher. He has been up and down and shown gigantic strikeout stuff over the past few weeks, but also has a tendency to blow up and walk the entire farm. How do you feel about 10K plus on DraftKings? I'll pull up some other FanDuel and Yahoo prices momentarily, but how do you feel about this group of pitchers and who stands out to you?
Pretty stacked slate. Verlander, obviously, but then a good matchup for Walker Buehler, who is a really good pitcher. I think he's priced a little bit too close to Verlander for me. The argument that I would end up having to make for Buehler is if we get ownership projections, and for one, it's really easy to get an expensive pitcher, and for two, Verlander is just getting way more ownership, then obviously you can pivot to Buehler, but I think Verlander's better. I think the matchup's better. Yu Darvish is really interesting because on DraftKings, he's $2,000 less than Verlander. And he's another example of a pitcher who I do end up kind of manually adjusting my projections, because he's fixed whatever issue he was having at the beginning of the year. He was walking everyone. But if you go back, I don't remember off the top of my head the exact numbers. I remember writing it in the deep dive last time he pitched. But it was something like in the first 12 starts or whatever he made this season, he had walked at least he had a double-digit walk percentage in, I think, 10 of them. And then in his 12 or 13 subsequent starts, he hasn't done it once. So, and just looking at his recent starts, he hasn't walked a single batter over his last 4 starts. So just fixed whatever mechanical issue he was having. The strikeouts are still there over those same last 4 starts, 9, 8, 9, and 10 strikeouts. So I think you're clearly getting upside. It's a San Francisco offense that isn't very good, but also doesn't strike out a lot. So I think Verlander still has the better matchup, but you're not losing a ton if that $2,000 gets you better bats.
Yep, that makes total sense to me. And you did, in fact, right? I remember reading it, and I'll try to pull up the exact stat as we roll through here of Darvish over those first few starts and where he's come to today. Was in the deep dive last time Darvish started, so I can look back 5 days ago and try to find that pretty quickly. As we roll on here, you get Fiers, Caleb Smith, Wainwright, Stroman, and Julio Teheran all above 8K to 10K. Fiers gets the Yankees in Oakland. I'm not sure I can make a case for him having upside here. I'll check the over-under and spread on that one just quickly to see if I'm missing anything that Vegas might be seeing. -110 for Oakland. So it's J.A. Happ versus Mike Fiers, who's 11-3 on the year, 3.46 ERA. 9.5 over-under. Is Fiers a contrarian play here? Are there enough strikeouts in this Yankee lineup to give Fiers some upside?
Not a chance in hell. I'm rostering Fiers at 9,600.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are plays where I'll say something like that.
7,600 feels like, yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'll say something like that, and then I'll see my exposures at the end of the night, and I have 0.7%. He got in one lineup. I'd be really surprised if I got there with Fires. There's just no reason. I mean, he's not a high strikeout guy. He's not in a good matchup. For him to pay off this price tag, you basically need him to have one of his best starts of the last 3 years, and that's not something that I'm looking to get to.
Let's go and talk about Caleb Smith, Wainwright, Stroman, Teran. Of these, Wainwright would seem susceptible to the home run ball against Milwaukee at a pretty high clip. Stroman against Cleveland, I don't know what to make of Marcus Stroman. I love watching him pitch. If I'm a baseball fan and I sit down to watch, he's one of the guys I want on the mound because he enjoys the game. He plays with high energy. He's enjoyable to watch. But from a DFS perspective, there's just some hit or miss. Sorry, there's not as much hit or miss stuff, meaning he's not as much a strikeout pitcher as some may believe him to be. 8,400 for him. And then you have Teran against Miami, which seems like an upside spot at 8K. No real lefty power for the Marlins. SunTrust Park obviously favors that a bit. Teran typically favors lefty power bats as well. Anybody else in this range between Smith down to Teran who stands out to you?
It's a pretty ugly range. I mean, like Adam Wainwright's decent, especially against righties, but for one, Milwaukee should have a lot of lefties, and for two, he's up to 9K. Your point on Stroman, I agree completely. He's really fun to watch. He's good at preventing runs. He's very good at getting ground balls. But as Alex and I talked about on the deeper dive yesterday when we were talking about Sonny Gray, just getting ground balls isn't enough to make you a good DFS option because you don't get extra points for that or anything. He doesn't strike guys out. Cleveland's a tough strikeout matchup. Teheran faces the Marlins. I think that's a spot where out of everyone below that we talked about below Darvish, I would prefer Teheran. But the issue is that people tend to just load up on pitchers against Miami. And so it's very, very unlikely that you're going to get any sort of an edge by rostering Teheran. And it's possible that ownership gets to a point where there's a bigger edge than just finding someone else.
And also, this is a guy who's a 10.8% K- walk ratio. It's 22.4%. Yeah, 11.6 walk ratio is good for, or bad for, worst for, whatever phrase you want to use. Third or fourth worst on this slate. That's not good. That's not going to get it done. And yes, I get them that the Marlins have had a really terrible season, that the ownership there, including Derek Jeter, has torn them down completely. But there's enough there, I think, to give Teran enough of a black eye that I'd stay away from really rostering him. To Adam's point, especially, he's probably going to be in the low 20s. I mean, ownership-wise, the matchup will draw people to him. The price point will be cheap enough where people will justify rostering him. Sandoval, Porcello, Wogesback, Happ, Plutko, Joe Musgrove, Daniel Norris, Hauser. Let's stay with that as our next group of pitchers. You know, I will make the joke again. I keep thinking it's Pablo Sandoval who's all of a sudden being listed as a starting pitcher, which would make my day. And yes, I'm in favor of the DH. And yes, I don't like to see position players pitch. But of all of them, if Pablo Sandoval took the mound regularly, I'd be very happy. So you have Sandoval, Porcello, Wogesback, Happ, Plutko. Musgrove, we've seen some upside from him at times in his career. Daniel Norris had the pedigree coming out of the minor leagues, hasn't really done anything with it in the majors, has Houston here, so he's off the radar. What are we thinking? Does a Happ jump into play here at 6,800 against the Oakland A's? There are a bunch of righty power bats in that lineup. They do not strike out a ton against lefties. Is that just off the reservation as well?
His strikeout stuff just hasn't been there this year. It's like he's gone back to whatever he was doing. I remember when he first started striking guys out in, I want to say it was like 2016, 2017. We were still at FanVice, and I remember Draft Cheat really, really diving in and trying to figure out what the hell was going on. But it's like he's back to doing whatever he was doing for most of his career because he's not striking guys out this year. It's not a good strikeout matchup. Out of that group, I think I would like to get the Adrian Hauser. It's not the best strikeout matchup against the Cardinals now that they have Carpenter and Ozuna and Molina back in their lineup. But Hauser's been pretty good this year. Overall, he has a 24.7% strikeout percentage. As a starter, he's at 22.4%. 4.2 Sierra is pretty solid. Very high ground ball percentage, which while that's not enough on it by itself to make someone a good DFS play, right, it's much different when you're talking about a $5,200 ground ball pitcher than an $8,400 Stroman, because at $5,200, you're able to just there's value in just getting innings and getting efficient outs. So an average strikeout percentage plus an above average ground ball percentage starts to become more appealing. So I think Hauser is my favorite out of that group.
And that is saying something. I'll make some sort of random Doogie Howser joke now that doesn't really make sense, but I had to insert it somehow or another. But we get down to the bottom here, and we'll talk some stacks and probably uncover a couple of more pitching facts as we roll on. Don't have to belabor this podcast. Think you'll get tons of content. You will, in fact, get tons of content over at awesemo.com. Behind the paywall, you get Adam, you're still on the deep dive for Wednesday?
Yep, I'll be on the morning show. I'll be on the deep dive. I'll be on the deeper dive. And I'll be on the podcast again.
There you go. So you get a lot of Adam Scher in your life. And you also get me actually pronouncing his last name correctly. So there's that. But you get Adam on the morning show, which is the MLB strategy show. That's free over on YouTube. The deeper dive free. Live before lock is free. Adam will not be on that one. So you get a respite from Adam in that one. And then the podcast, of course, the DFS Early Bird, which you're listening to here, will be EMAC and Adam on Thursday morning. And that is free as well. Behind the paywall is Adam's write-up, which is premium, Awesemo Plus only. So to get to that, you need to use the promo code EARLYBIRD, get your 50% off, or just sign up and pay in full if that's really what you're into. But use the 50% off, and then you get projections, Fantasy Cruncher, add-on as a potential option. You get the lineup builder, you get ownership projections, and you get so much more. So NFL season around the corner. We have DFS preseason for NFL. We're going to have projections for so much to happen there. So keep that in mind as we roll on. Are we rostering Aaron Brooks tonight, Adam?
No, but we're rostering Mike Montgomery.
Oh, all right. Talk to me.
I don't know what's going on with his price. So he was like 40. He was 5K against the Tigers, and he went out and did what you should do against the Tigers. Went for 41 DraftKings points. Obviously, that's an anomaly. But he's never been a bad pitcher.
Right.
Since 2017, I think this is in that same deep dive article as the Darvish stat, but since 2017, he has like a 3.97 Sierra or somewhere in that ballpark as a starter over like 160 innings. He's never been bad. He's never been a really high strikeout pitcher, but he's not bad. The Orioles offense is mediocre at best. And now he's only $4,200 coming off of another good start where he went 6 innings against the Mets. Over his last 3 starts, we now have 5 innings against Boston with 7 strikeouts, 7 innings with 12 strikeouts against the Tigers, 6 innings with 3 strikeouts against the Mets. And looking at his numbers, he's made 6 starts now for Kansas City. Not the easiest matchups. 2 against Cleveland, which is a tough matchup. 1 against Boston, which is tough. 1 against the Mets, which is tough. 1 against Toronto, which is middle of the road, and then the 1 against Detroit. But his plate discipline numbers are pretty impressive. He's increased his cutter usage. His swinging strike percentage over the last 4, which is Mets, Tigers, Red Sox, and Blue Jays, 10.3, 15.6 against Boston, 20% against the Tigers, and then 10% against the Mets. So pretty decent swinging strike numbers. But what really stands out is the percentage of pitches that he's getting hitters to chase at outside of the strike zone. In his first start against Cleveland, the average is normally right around 30.5%, 31%, 40.7%, then 25% the next time against Cleveland, 45.1 against Toronto, 35.6 against the Red Sox, 43.2 against the Tigers, and 34.6 against the Mets. So doing a really good job of getting chases out of the zone. That's way more positive things than I need to find for a $4,200 pitcher.
Right. I think that's a very good way to put it, that you've checked off a ton of boxes that have upside for Mike Montgomery. Trying to find. All right. So over on FanDuel, he is 7,500, which feels like a price from the points you just made seems a lot more in line with where you might expect him. Right, Adam?
Yeah, I think that would be at that price tag, and not on FanDuel because you only roster 1 pitcher,
Yep.
so I'm just not going to get there. But if he were 7,500 on DraftKings, it's the kind of guy where when we did the podcast, I would be like, I'm not really interested, and then maybe I get like 10% just because he fits in the lineups and he's not an egregious play.
Yep. That makes a ton of sense. Yep. Rodriguez, Smiley, Brooks, no love there. Any other names that maybe we passed over or I didn't ask you expressly about that at first glance here you think are at least worth further research, or guys who, again, to your point, may end up being on 8% or 10% of some of your tournament lineups?
I don't think so. My first thought is that this is going to be a slate. Normally, on most slates, I'll end up either kind of concentrated on pitching or kind of concentrated on a few specific stacks. I expect this to be a slate where I'm pretty heavily invested in a few pitchers, and then my hitting is really spread out, because I just think that it's not only a matter of there not being a lot of pitching talent in the mid-range and at the bottom, but it's also just really, really tough matchups. Like Drew Smiley at 4,600 on the surface is fine, but he's facing the Red Sox in Fenway. Right. So I'm just not really sure that I want to turn any of my Mike Montgomery exposure into Drew Smiley.
That makes sense. That makes total sense. Let's quickly look at some stacks. I'll run some over-unders and lines at you. Texas is minus 130 and over-under of 11. First pitch temperature is supposed to be around 11. You have minus 120 for Kansas City, 10.5 over-under there between the Royals and the Orioles. Red Sox and Phillies, a 12 over-under. Porcello v. Smiley, as you were just talking about, minus 155 for the Boston Red Sox. And that is the sum of our double-digit over-unders. Obviously, team totals can play into as well here. I assume Red Sox, Phillies, fairly close to top of list as you look at this slate. And maybe, are you targeting Angels against Mike Minor? Do you think this is a blow-up spot where the Angels could put up a crooked number?
The Angels have the talent to, but I don't think it's a spot that I'll target. A 5.2 implied run total in Texas this time of year really isn't that high, especially for a team like the Angels that generally have high implied run totals. I think Boston stands out. Smiley may or may not have made some improvements since coming to Philly, but it's definitely not turned him into a pitcher that I'm scared to roster guys like Betts, Bogarts, Martinez against. So I think that's a spot that I'll want to get to. Kansas City is probably going to be really popular because they're outside of the top of the order with Merrifield, Soler, and Dozier, who all are worth their price tags. You get some really, really cheap bats. So they'll be a really popular team probably that people use to fit Verlander. If they're not, then I'm interested. So, yeah, I mean, anytime a team's facing Aaron Brooks, that stands out.
There you go. Any one-offs? Like, are there any? I know that's not typically your process, but anybody from an offensive standpoint that maybe not on a good stack team that, when you look first glance here, might stand out for a matchup perspective? I know without full numbers in front of you, a little bit more difficult, but anybody that you think is worth checking a box next to this early on?
Braves right-handed power, so
Sure.
Acuna, Albies, Donaldson, Duvall. Caleb Smith's a really good strikeout pitcher, but he's outside of Miami. He gives up power to righties, and the Braves righties don't have really high strikeout percentages for the most part. So that's always something that I like to look at if I am trying to pinpoint a one-off, is someone with power that is likely to put the ball in play against a pitcher who strikes you out or gives up power. So they check those boxes. I think Adam Plutko is always a good guy that I like to target for one-off. So Michael Conforto, Pete Alonso, they stand out.
When you say things as logically as you just did, it makes a lot of sense. So guys who put the ball in play against pitchers who tend to give up power and some launch angle, and there you go. Maybe a one-off homer that really sets your lineup apart. As always, you can find Adam over on Twitter at ShipMyMoneyDFS. Of course, you can find them in Slack chat if you're an Awesemo member. All of the analysts for Awesemo.com host office hours where you can ask them questions about their process, what they go about, and how they go about creating lineups, creating their projections, whatever it may be, especially as baseball winds down. People start shifting towards football. Adam's still going to be focused on baseball and then make the move over to basketball. Lofty, of course, will transition from baseball to football. The podcast will keeping on here, but you can get questions in over there in office hours if you are an Awesemo member. Remember, early bird is your promo code. Want to remind you, week number 1 over on Yahoo, you get a $25 management free tournament. So management fee free tournament. I have to say that correctly. But you can get in there, 10 entry max, and then there is a $10 with a 12% management fee. Yahoo's going big. Week number 1, probably see that for 2 and 3 at least. So you'll want to get in over there, deposit, and play on Yahoo DFS. Week 1 of the NFL is always huge. It's not that far away, so start doing the research. Start thinking about where you want to subscribe. Hopefully, come on over to Awesemo.com. And as always, don't forget, over on YouTube, on iTunes, wherever you listen to podcasts, subscribe, like, comment on YouTube. Make sure you hit that alarm bell so you get notifications when we go live. With all that said, find me on Twitter at Dan Strafford, Awesemo_com for our main Twitter handle, Awesemo NFL, Awesemo MLB, and so much more available as well. Tomorrow morning, Emac and Adam right here on the DFS Early Bird, presented by Awesemo.com.